You know, in my 400 years as Ambassador Moran of the Krafthnog Republic, I have witnessed some truly spectacular displays of interspecies stupidity. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the sheer arrogance I was about to witness in Council Chamber 7 that day. The meeting was supposed to be routine. Well, as routine as deciding whether to admit a new species into the Galactic Alliance could be. The humans had been petitioning for membership for 3 standard cycles now, and frankly, most of us were getting tired of the paperwork. Their little blue-green world sat right in the middle of several important trade routes, so ignoring them was becoming inconvenient. The chamber buzzed with the usual pre-meeting chatter. Admiral Drahorn, all 7 feet of scaled reptilian intimidation, was discussing battle tactics with his aide. His species, the Vorthak, had conquered half their solar system before they even invented faster-than-light travel. Impressive, if you enjoy that sort of thing. Judge Quintara clicked and chittered in the corner, her 4 arms organizing data tablets with mechanical precision. The Zephyrians were known for their efficiency and their complete inability to understand humor. She had been analyzing human culture for months, reducing their entire civilization to statistical probabilities and behavioral patterns. And there I was, floating in my environmental suit, watching this parade of galactic prejudice unfold. My people, the Krafthnog, are energy beings. We gave up physical forms about 1,000 years ago, which gives us a rather unique perspective on species that are still attached to meat and bone. The humans entered the chamber at precisely 1400 hours, standard galactic time. I had to admire their punctuality, even if everything else about them screamed harmless. Amy Kowalski, their lead diplomat, was a small woman by their species standards. She wore simple dark clothing and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen enough committee meetings to know they were all basically the same. Her companion, Brandon Torres, was clearly military. Straight posture, sharp eyes, the kind of alertness that comes from years of expecting trouble. They took their seats without fanfare, and Amy immediately began organizing her notes. Such a human thing to do. Always writing, always documenting. I found it oddly endearing. So, Admiral Drahorn rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding together. These are the humans we are supposed to consider for Alliance membership. His tone suggested he was discussing whether to step on an insect. The condescension was so thick you could cut it with a plasma blade. Commander Tom Mali, a hulking brute from the Gorvan Empire, laughed. Actually laughed. Look at them. They are so small, so soft. What could they possibly contribute to our alliance? Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their military consists of throwing metal projectiles at each other. Judge Quintara's mandibles clicked in what I assumed was agreement. My analysis indicates humans engage primarily in agricultural and artistic pursuits. Their conflict resolution typically involves lengthy discussions rather than decisive action. I watched Amy's face during this charming display of diplomacy. She did not flinch, did not argue, did not even look up from her notes. Brandon's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained silent. Remarkable restraint, really. Perhaps, Admiral Drahorn continued, warming to his theme, we should suggest they apply for protectorate status instead. We could assign a proper warrior species to guide them. The laughter that followed was not kind. Species after species chimed in with their own dismissive observation. The humans were too peaceful, too fragile, too civilized. They had never faced real hardship, real war, real bloodshed. How could such soft creatures possibly understand the harsh realities of galactic politics? Through it all, Amy kept writing. Her pen moved steadily across the paper, as if she was taking meeting minutes rather than listening to her entire species being insulted. I found myself increasingly curious about what she was thinking behind those calm dark eyes. Brandon finally spoke, his voice measured and professional. Ambassador Kowalski has extensive experience in crisis management and diplomatic resolution. Perhaps we should allow her to present our case before drawing conclusions. Crisis management. Commander Mali snorted. What crises could humans possibly face on their little garden world? Deciding which flowers to plant. More laughter, more dismissive comments. The humans sat quietly through all of it, and I began to suspect there was far more to these creatures than their soft appearance suggested. After all, any species that could maintain such composure while being systematically insulted was either incredibly stupid or incredibly dangerous. I was betting on dangerous. That is when General Krafthnog decided to make his entrance. And by entrance, I mean he practically broke down the chamber doors with his massive bulk. The Thangorian was 8 feet of pure muscle, covered in what looked like natural armor plating. His species had a charming habit of settling disputes by literally eating their enemies. Diplomatic immunity meant I did not have to worry about becoming his lunch, but I still felt my energy field flicker nervously. Apologies for my lateness, he rumbled, though he sounded about as sorry as a supernova sounds quiet. I was reviewing the human military records. He held up a datapad like it was a piece of rotting fruit. Fascinating reading, truly fascinating. Amy glanced up briefly, then returned to her notes. That small gesture seemed to irritate Krafthnog more than a direct challenge would have. Tell me, humans, he continued, settling his enormous frame into a specially reinforced chair that groaned under his weight. Exactly what experience does your species have with real warfare? And please, do not insult our intelligence with stories about your primitive projectile weapons. Brandon's expression remained perfectly neutral. Our military history is well documented, General. We have provided comprehensive records to the Council. Records, Krafthnog barked out a laugh that sounded like boulders colliding. Numbers on a page. Statistics. But have you ever felt the hot blood of your enemies splash across your face? Have you ever heard the death screams of 1,000 warriors echo across a battlefield? Oh, here we go, I thought. Nothing quite like a Thangorian war story to liven up a diplomatic meeting. My people, Krafthnog continued, warming to his favorite subject, conquered 17 worlds before we even discovered spaceflight. We fought with claw and fang, with blade and fire. Our young warriors earned their names by taking the hearts of their enemies. This is warfare, humans. This is bloodshed. Judge Quintara's mandibles clicked approvingly. The Zephyrians also understand true conflict. Our hive wars lasted for centuries. Millions died. We consumed our enemies' resources, absorbed their knowledge, grew stronger. Only through such trials do species achieve greatness. Commander Molly leaned forward, his scarred face split by an unpleasant grin. The Gorvan Empire was forged in the fires of constant battle. We learned to fight before we learned to speak. Our children play games that would terrify your adult warriors. The testimonials kept coming. Admiral Drahorn spoke of planetary sieges lasting decades. Another delegate described ritual combats where entire bloodlines were exterminated for sport. Each species seemed determined to prove they were more bloodthirsty, more violent, more experienced with the darker aspects of existence than anyone else in the chamber. Amy continued taking notes through all of it. Her pen moved steadily, occasionally pausing, as she seemed to consider a particular phrase or detail. I found myself watching her more than listening to the increasingly graphic war stories. There was something about her composure that struck me as not frightened, not impressed, not disgusted, just professionally interested. You see, Krafthnog spread his massive arms wide, addressing the humans directly. This is what strength looks like. This is what power means. Your species sits on a single world, playing with their gardens and their art, writing their little poems about peace and love. How can you possibly understand the responsibilities that come with galactic citizenship? Perhaps, Commander Molly added with a nasty chuckle, we should establish a special category of membership for species like this. Something like honorary members. They could provide entertainment at our gatherings. Poetry readings, flower arrangements, maybe some of their quaint folk songs. The laughter that followed was even crueler than before. I noticed several delegates pulling up human cultural files on their tablets, clearly looking for more ammunition. Look at this, one of them called out. They have entire institutions dedicated to healing. They spend resources keeping their weak alive instead of culling them for the good of the species. And here another added, they have something called humanitarian aid. They actually send resources to help other groups during disasters. How delightfully naive. Brandon's hands clenched slightly, but his voice remained steady. We believe that strength can be measured in many ways, General Krafthnog. Can it? Krafthnog leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the human delegation. Then tell me, soft humans, what do you know of strength? What do you know of sacrifice? What do you know of bloodshed? The chamber fell silent. Every eye, optical sensor and consciousness in the room focused on the two humans. This was the moment. The challenge had been issued in terms so clear that even the universal translators could not soften them. Amy finally looked up from her notes. She set down her pen with deliberate precision, folded her hands on the table, and met Krafnog's glare with steady dark eyes. That, she said quietly, is an interesting question, General. Something in her tone made the chamber's atmosphere shift. It was subtle, like the moment before a storm, when the air pressure changes, and every instinct screams that something dangerous is coming. I felt my energy field pulse with anticipation. Krafthnog apparently missed the warning signs entirely. What happened next was like watching a predator mistake a landmine for a sleeping prey animal. Krafthnog pushed himself up from his chair, all 8 feet and several tons of him, rising like a mountain with anger management issues. The reinforced floor actually creaked under his weight. Interesting, he snarled, leaning across the table toward Amy. You think this is some academic exercise? Some theoretical discussion you can observe from your safe little world? The other delegates began shifting in their seats. Some leaned forward, anticipating entertainment. Others activated recording devices, clearly expecting to capture the moment when the soft humans finally cracked under pressure. Judge Quintara's 4 arms moved in what I recognized as her species equivalent of rubbing hands together in anticipation. General, Brandon said carefully, perhaps we should. No. Krafnog's roar echoed off the chamber walls. I want to hear from her, the quiet one. The note-taker. He pointed one massive claw directly at Amy. You sit there scribbling away like some scholar studying insects. But this is not a classroom. Human, this is reality. Amy set down her pen again, but this time she did not pick it up. She placed both hands flat on the table, and looked up at the towering alien with an expression that was, well, I had seen that look before. Usually right before something exploded. You want proof, Krafthnog continued, his voice rising to a bellow that made the chamber's audio dampeners struggle to compensate. You want us to accept your pathetic species as equals. But you have never faced true hardship. You have never made the hard choices.
You have never.
He slammed his fist down on the table, and the reinforced surface actually cracked. The sound was like a gunshot in the suddenly silent chamber. What do you know about bloodshed? The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before ancient gods. Every species in that chamber understood the significance. In galactic politics, when someone questions your experience with violence, they are not just insulting you. They are questioning your right to exist at the same level as civilized beings. I watched the other delegates' reactions with the morbid fascination of someone witnessing a slow-motion disaster. They expected the humans to do what weaker species always did when confronted by superior force. Make excuses, cite technicalities, appeal to regulations, or simply back down entirely. Commander Molly was actually grinning, probably already composing the story he would tell about the day the humans got put in their place. Admiral Draharn had his arms crossed, waiting for the inevitable human surrender. Judge Quintara was no doubt calculating the statistical probability of various human responses, all of which likely ended in humiliation. What none of them expected was what actually happened. Amy slowly turned her head to look at Brandon. It was not a panicked look, or a pleading look, or even a questioning look. It was the kind of look that passes between people who have worked together long enough to communicate without words. Brandon's response was equally subtle, a barely perceptible nod and a single step backward. That step spoke volumes. It was not retreat. It was clearance, like giving someone room to work. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. The background hum of life support systems became unnaturally loud. Even the most insensitive delegates began to notice that something had shifted in the room's dynamics. The energy patterns I was detecting through my sensors suggested every human in the chamber had just become significantly more alert. Amy stood up slowly, not quickly, not dramatically, just a smooth, controlled rise that somehow carried more menace than Krafnog's explosive outburst. She was still small compared to most beings in the chamber. But the space around her seemed to expand, as if reality itself was giving her room to operate. She looked up at the massive general, who was still looming over the table like an angry monument, and smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the kind of smile that made me very glad I was an energy being who did not have blood that could freeze. General Krafthnog, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite its quiet tone. That is an excellent question. Then she began removing her gloves. Let me tell you something about moments that change everything. They usually happen very quietly. No dramatic music, no special lighting effects, no slow-motion sequences, just a small human woman taking off a pair of simple black gloves in a room full of aliens who thought they knew what violence looked like. Amy pulled off the first glove with the same methodical precision she had used for everything else, finger by finger, smooth and controlled. When her right hand emerged, I heard several sharp intakes of breath from around the chamber. Her hand was a roadmap of scars, Not the clean, precise scars of ritual combat or ceremonial marking that some species favored. These were working scars. Surgical scars. The kind left by years of cutting, stitching, and healing under pressure. They ran across her knuckles, up her fingers, disappeared under her sleeve, and clearly continued up her arm. The second glove followed the first, revealing identical markings on her left hand. Amy flexed her fingers once, as if checking that everything still worked properly, then placed both hands flat on the table where everyone could see them. "You asked what I know about bloodshed, General Krafthnog," she said, her tone as conversational as if she was discussing the weather. "That is a fair question. I suppose the answer depends on how we define the term." Krafnog's massive jaw hung slightly open. For the first time since I had known him, the great warrior seemed at a loss for words. "If we are talking about causing bloodshed," Amy continued, "then I admit my experience is limited. I have never conquered worlds or led armies into battle. I have never taken lives for sport or glory." She paused, studying her scarred hands with clinical interest. "But if we are talking about dealing with bloodshed, about understanding what it means when blood flows freely, about knowing every way a body can break and leak and fail," she looked up at Krafthnog. "Well, that is a different story entirely." The chamber was so quiet I could hear the individual heartbeats of every organic being present. Judge Quintara had stopped clicking entirely, which in her species indicated either deep thought or complete shock. "I spent 15 years as a trauma surgeon before I moved into diplomacy," Amy said, turning her hands over to reveal even more scars on her palms. "Emergency medicine, specifically. The kind where people arrive broken and bleeding, and you have approximately 30 minutes to figure out how to put them back together." Commander Molly leaned forward despite himself. What kind of injuries?" Amy's smile was brief but genuine. "Every kind you can imagine, Commander, and several you probably cannot. Vehicular accidents where people are crushed, torn, impaled on twisted metal. Industrial accidents where limbs are severed, bodies are burned, internal organs are ruptured. Natural disasters where buildings collapse, and bodies are broken in ways that should not be compatible with survival." She held up her right hand, pointing to a particularly prominent scar that ran from her wrist to her middle finger. "This one came from reaching into a collapsed structure to extract a child whose leg was pinned under concrete. The metal I was cutting through was sharp, very sharp, but the alternative was letting the child bleed to death while we waited for better tools." Admiral Drahorn found his voice. You saved the child." "That time, yes." Amy's tone remained matter-of-fact. "Not every time. That is the reality of trauma medicine. You win some, you lose some, and you learn to keep working regardless." Brandon stepped forward slightly, and I noticed that his earlier tension had been replaced by something that looked almost like pride. Ambassador Kowalski worked in combat zones for 7 of those 15 years. Military hospitals, field stations, disaster relief operations, places where the casualties come in faster than you can count them. "Faster than you can count," Amy repeated thoughtfully. "That is accurate. During the earthquake in Sector 7, we processed over 300 casualties in 18 hours. Crushing injuries, internal bleeding, severe trauma. The kind of wounds where you have to decide in seconds whether someone can be saved or whether you need to move on to the next patient." She flexed her fingers again, and I noticed how steady they were. No tremor, no uncertainty. These were hands that had learned to work under pressure. "Blood loss," she continued, as if she was giving a medical lecture, "is actually quite fascinating from a clinical perspective. The human body contains approximately 5 liters of blood. Lose 30%, and you go into shock. 40%, and you need immediate transfusion, or you die. But here is the interesting part. People do not die quietly. They fight, they struggle, they scream, and thrash, and beg for their lives while their blood soaks through every bandage you can apply." The silence in the chamber was becoming oppressive. Several delegates had actually moved back from the table. "I have held pressure on wounds that would not stop bleeding for hours," Amy said. "I have reached inside human bodies to manually compress arteries and keep people alive. I have watched more blood flow across operating tables than most soldiers see on battlefields. And yes, General, I have heard death screams. Thousands of them. The difference is, I was trying to make them stop." Krafthnog seemed to have shrunk in his chair. His earlier bluster had evaporated entirely. 72-hour shifts, Brandon added quietly. "During major disasters, medical personnel often work 3 days straight. No sleep, minimal food, Just constant surgery and trauma response. The longest I ever worked continuously was 86 hours, Amy said. Massive transportation accident. Multiple vehicles, over 100 casualties. We lost count of how many people we treated. We lost count of everything except keeping our hands moving, and our patients breathing. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with each delegate in turn. You want to know about bloodshed? I can tell you exactly how long it takes someone to bleed to death from a severed artery. I can describe the color differences between arterial and venous bleeding. I can explain why some wounds look terrible, but are actually minor, and why others look minor but will kill you in minutes. Amy paused, then continued in the same calm professional tone. I can tell you what human blood smells like when it is fresh, what it sounds like when it hits the floor, what it feels like when it dries on your hands after a 16-hour surgery. I know the exact pressure required to stop different types of bleeding, the precise angle needed to insert a chest tube, the specific technique for emergency surgery when someone is dying on your table and you are the only thing standing between them and death. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then Amy picked up her gloves and began putting them back on. So yes, General Krafthnog, she said, pulling the second glove into place with the same methodical precision she had used to remove it. I know about bloodshed. I just prefer it when it stops. The silence stretched for several more seconds before Amy continued, and I found myself leaning forward in anticipation. Somehow, I suspected she was not finished educating us. Of course, she said, settling back into her chair with the same quiet confidence she had maintained throughout the meeting. My experience is not unique among humans. It is simply what we do. Judge Quintara's mandibles clicked once, uncertainly. What you do? Develop medicine in response to violence, Amy replied. It is quite logical, really. Throughout our history, every major conflict has driven advances in medical science. We learned to perform surgery because people were injured in wars. We developed anesthesia because we needed to operate on wounded soldiers. We created blood transfusion techniques because battlefield casualties were dying from blood loss. She gestured with one scarred hand. Most species seem to view violence and healing as separate concepts. You fight, then you heal. You conquer, then you recover. But humans learned early that if you want to win conflicts, you need to be able to repair your people while the fighting continues. Admiral Vashi, who had remained silent throughout the entire meeting, finally spoke. His species, the Morthek, were known for their tactical brilliance, but had always avoided medical discussions. Too squeamish, apparently. These combat medics, he said carefully. They work during active fighting. Brandon nodded. Combat medics are trained soldiers who specialize in battlefield medicine. They carry weapons and medical supplies. They fight when necessary and heal when possible, often doing both simultaneously. Amy smiled slightly. I trained several combat medics during my military hospital rotations. Remarkable people. They will run directly into enemy fire to reach a wounded soldier, perform emergency surgery while bullets are flying overhead, then pick up their weapons and return to combat. The concept seemed to be causing visible distress among several delegates. Commander Mali actually looked pale, which was impressive considering his species' natural gray complexion. You mean, Admiral Vashi said slowly. They heal their enemies as well as their allies. If time and resources permit, yes, Amy confirmed. Medical ethics are quite clear on this point. Wounded beings require treatment regardless of which side they fought on. Many of our greatest medical advances came from treating injuries sustained by people who were trying to kill us hours earlier. I felt a strange sensation in my energy field that took me a moment to identify. It was awe. Here I was, a being of pure energy who had transcended physical limitations centuries ago, and I was in awe of creatures made of meat and bone. This is Judge Quintara, struggled with the concept. This is not logical. Healing your enemies makes them stronger. They can fight again. True, Amy agreed. But it also means that when the fighting stops, there are more people left alive to rebuild, to negotiate, to find better solutions. We learned that winning a war is useless if everyone dies in the process. Quartermaster A, a practical-minded being from the Logistics Guild, leaned forward with obvious interest. How do you evacuate wounded from battlefields? Surely combat conditions make medical transport impossible. Brandon and Amy exchanged another one of their wordless communications before Brandon answered. We developed specialized evacuation procedures, medical transports that can operate in combat zones, personnel trained to extract casualties under fire, mobile surgical units that can be deployed anywhere within hours. The goal, Amy added, is to get injured people from point of wounding to advanced medical care within what we call the golden hour. Studies showed that if you can get someone to a surgeon within 60 minutes of severe trauma, survival rates increase dramatically. You have, Admiral Vashi said with something approaching reverence, weaponized mercy. Amy considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. I suppose that is one way to put it. We learned that keeping people alive, even in the worst circumstances, even when logic suggests it is hopeless, gives us strategic advantages that pure violence cannot achieve. She looked around the chamber again, and I noticed that the atmosphere had completely changed. Where there had been condescension and mockery, now there was something closer to respectful attention. Which brings us back to why we are here, Amy said quietly. Diplomacy is just another form of medicine. Instead of treating physical wounds, we treat the injuries between species, between civilizations. We work to stop the bleeding before it starts. Judge Quintara's forearms moved in what I had learned, was her species' gesture of deep curiosity. Ambassador Kowalski, she said, if you were so accomplished in medicine, why did you leave it for diplomacy? Amy's answer was immediate and simple. Same job, different wounds to heal. She gestured toward the assembled delegates. Instead of repairing damaged organs, I work to repair damaged relationships. Instead of stopping physical bleeding, I try to prevent the kind of conflicts that cause civilizations to bleed resources, lives, hope. Instead of saving individual patients, I try to save entire worlds from the trauma of war. The logic was so elegant, so perfectly human, that I felt my energy field pulse with something approaching admiration. General Krafthnog cleared his massive throat. When he spoke, his voice had lost all trace of its earlier arrogance. Ambassador Kowalski, I owe you an apology. My words were spoken in ignorance. I had no understanding of what your species has endured, or what you have accomplished. Amy nodded graciously. Apology accepted, General. Misunderstandings are common when species first meet. That is why we have diplomatic processes. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Every delegate in the chamber voted to admit humans to the Galactic Alliance as full members. Even Commander Molly, who had started the day comparing humans to garden decorations. As the meeting concluded, and delegates began filing out, I found myself reflecting on what I had witnessed. In my 400 years of diplomatic service, I had encountered species that were pure warriors, species that were dedicated healers, species that were brilliant negotiators, but I had never before met a species that was simultaneously the most violent and the most healing I had ever encountered. Humans, I realized, had not conquered their violent nature, they had weaponized their compassion instead, and that perhaps made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy.